The boy heard the chain before he saw it. A low, rhythmic clinking, metal against metal, coming from somewhere deep in the tree line behind the old Whittier property. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in the hills above Hong Kong's Kowloon district. Not the sound of wind chimes. Not the sound of a dog pulling at a leash. Something heavier. Something deliberate. Something alive. The boy was 9 years old. His name was Kai-chin. He had no business being in those hills at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in November 1971, except that his grandmother had sent him to collect firewood, and Kai had a habit of wandering farther than he was supposed to. His grandmother called it disobedience. Kai called it curiosity. They were both right. What Kai found at the end of that sound would become the single most important morning of his life. Not because of what he saw, because of what the man chained to that tree taught him in the 3 hours before anyone else arrived. And what that man did for Kai's family in the years that followed was something that Kai kept secret for over 50 years. Until now. Stay with me on this one. Before we get to that tree, you need to understand 2 things. You need to understand who Kai-chin was. And you need to understand what Bruce Lee was doing in those hills at 6 in the morning. Chained to a eucalyptus tree, completely alone, 40 pounds of iron links wrapped around his torso. Because he wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't being punished. He was training. And the training method he was using that morning was something that no martial arts school in the world had ever seen before, and something that would not be understood for another 4 decades, until sports scientists in the 21st century gave it a name and called it revolutionary. But we'll get to that. First, the boy. Kai-chin lived with his grandmother, Mei Lin, in a 2-room concrete apartment on the 4th floor of a building in Kowloon that had been scheduled for demolition twice and survived both times through bureaucratic error. His mother had died when he was 3. Tuberculosis. His father was a fisherman who worked the waters between Hong Kong and Macau and came home once a month smelling of diesel and salt and exhaustion. He left money on the kitchen table. He kissed Kai on the forehead while the boy pretended to be asleep. Then he left again. Mei Lin raised Kai with the fierce, unsentimental love of a woman who had survived the Japanese occupation, the Communist Revolution, and the loss of 2 children before the age of 40. She was 67 years old and weighed approximately 90 pounds, and she was the most terrifying person Kai had ever met. She ran the apartment with military discipline. Wake at 5, chores by 6, school by 7. Homework by 4, dinner by 6, bed by 8. No exceptions. No negotiations. No second chances. Kai loved her completely. He also routinely disobeyed her because he was 9, and 9-year-old boys are built for exactly 2 things: following orders and ignoring them. On this particular morning, Mei Lin had given Kai a simple task. Walk to the hillside behind the old Whittier property, a crumbling British colonial estate that had been abandoned since 1967, and collect fallen branches for the cooking fire. The gas line to their building had been shut off for repairs, and Mei Lin refused to eat cold rice. She had standards. Kai took the canvas bag his grandmother gave him and started walking. The path from their building to the hills took about 20 minutes. He knew it well. Past the wet market where the fish vendors were already setting up. Past the temple where old Mr. Lau sat every morning feeding pigeons that didn't need feeding. Past the construction site where they were building the new apartment towers that would eventually replace his building and force his grandmother to move somewhere she didn't want to go. The hills above Kowloon were not wilderness. They were the scrubby, overgrown edges of a city that was expanding faster than it could manage. Eucalyptus trees, planted by the British decades ago, grew in loose clusters between granite outcroppings. The ground was red clay covered in dry grass. In the mornings, before the city heat pressed down, the air up here was cool and clean and smelled of eucalyptus oil and wood smoke from the squatter settlements on the far ridge. Kai was gathering his 3rd armful of branches when he heard the chain. Clink. Pause. Clink. Pause. Clink, clink. Pause. He stopped. Set the branches down. Listened. The sound was coming from a dense stand of eucalyptus about 40 meters up the slope. rhythmic but irregular, like something moving against a fixed restraint, testing it, pulling against it, releasing, pulling again. Kai should have gone home. His grandmother had been explicit. Collect wood. Come back. Don't wander. Don't explore. Don't be Kai. Just this once. Be a boy who does what he's told. But Kai was Kai, and the sound was the kind of sound that a 9-year-old boy's brain processes not as danger but as mystery. And mystery was more powerful than obedience. It always had been. He climbed the slope. The eucalyptus trees grew closer together here, their papery bark peeling in long strips, their leaves casting dappled shadows on the red clay. The clinking grew louder, and then, through a gap in the trunks, Kai saw him. A man was chained to a tree, not metaphorically, literally. A heavy iron chain, the kind used to secure cargo on fishing boats, was wrapped 3 times around the trunk of a large eucalyptus and twice around the man's torso, pinning his arms to his sides from the elbows down. The chain was secured with a padlock that hung against the man's lower back. A key sat on a flat rock approximately 10 feet away from the tree, clearly visible, clearly intentional, clearly placed there by the man himself before he locked the chain. The man was shirtless. His body was compact, lean, and defined in a way that Kai had never seen on a living person. Every muscle was visible, not bulging like the bodybuilders in the magazines, but etched, carved, as if someone had taken a normal human body and removed everything that wasn't essential. His skin glistened with sweat despite the cool morning air. His bare feet were planted in the red clay, shoulder-width apart, toes gripping the earth. He was pulling against the chains, not frantically, not desperately, methodically. His body would tense, every muscle engaging simultaneously, his torso expanding against the iron links. The chain would creak, the tree would groan, then he would release, exhale, reset, and pull again. Clink, pause, clink, pause. Kai stood at the edge of the clearing, frozen, his canvas bag of firewood forgotten on the ground behind him. His mouth slightly open, his brain running through every possible explanation for what he was seeing and finding none of them adequate. The man sensed him before seeing him. His pulling stopped, his head turned, his eyes, dark and sharp and carrying the focused intensity of someone who had been deep inside a process and was now surfacing, found Kai standing between the eucalyptus trunks. Neither of them moved for approximately 4 seconds. Then the man spoke. His Cantonese was fluent but carried the slightly formal diction of someone who had spent years speaking English. Good morning. Kai stared. You're staring, the man observed. That's fine. I probably look strange. You're chained to a tree, Kai said. His voice came out higher than he intended. The voice of a boy who is trying very hard to sound like he is not afraid. I am, the man agreed. He seemed genuinely unbothered by this assessment. Why? The man considered the question with more seriousness than Kai expected. Because I need to understand something about my body that I can't understand any other way. Kai took a step closer. Then another. The man didn't react. His breathing was even. His posture, despite being wrapped in 40 pounds of chain, was relaxed. The posture of a person who was exactly where he chose to be. Are you stuck? Kai asked. The man looked at the key sitting on the rock 10 feet away. Then he looked back at Kai. Not stuck. Choosing. There's a difference. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. Trust me. You want to see where this goes. The man's name was Bruce Lee. He was 31 years old. He had returned to Hong Kong from the United States 8 months earlier, after Hollywood had spent 5 years teaching him a lesson that he already knew but refused to accept. The lesson was that an Asian man could not be the lead in an American film, could not be the hero, could not be the face on the poster, could be the sidekick, could be the villain, could be the wise old man or the comic relief or the exotic curiosity, but not the lead. Bruce had rejected this lesson the way he rejected everything that didn't survive contact with reality. He went to Hong Kong, made 2 films, The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, and both of them had shattered every box office record in Asian cinema history. He was now the biggest movie star on the continent. He was in pre-production on his 3rd film, Way of the Dragon, which he would write, direct, and star in. He was in negotiations for a Hollywood co-production called Enter the Dragon that would make him a global icon. He was, by every measurable standard, at the peak of his career and the height of his powers. And every morning, before the city woke up, before his phone started ringing, before the studios called and the press called and the fans gathered outside his house on Cumberland Road, Bruce Lee drove to the hills above Kowloon and trained alone. Not the training that people saw in films. Not the flashy kicks and acrobatic sequences that made audiences gasp. The real training. The work that happened beneath the performance. The foundation that nobody watched because it wasn't entertaining. It was just a man in a clearing, pushing his body past what it knew how to do, searching for the edge of human capability and then standing on it until he could see what was on the other side. The chains were part of a method Bruce had been developing for months. The concept was simple. The execution was brutal. By restraining his body with heavy chains and then attempting to generate maximum force against the restraint, Bruce was training his muscles to fire at full capacity from a position of zero momentum. No wind-up, no preparation, no running start, just explosive force generated from stillness, against resistance over and over, until the neuromuscular pathways were so deeply carved that the body could produce maximum power from any position, at any time without warning. Sports scientists would later call this isometric training combined with neuromuscular activation patterning. In 1971, Bruce Lee called it chain work. He had no name for the science. He had no lab. He had no research team. He had a set of fishing boat chains, a padlock, a eucalyptus tree, and an understanding of the human body that was 40 years ahead of the institutions that would eventually validate it. Kai did not know any of this. He knew only that a man was chained to a tree and that the key was sitting on a rock and that no one else seemed to be around. "Do you want me to bring you the key?" Kai asked. Bruce looked at him. For the first time, something like a smile crossed his face. Not a performance smile. The real kind. The kind that happens when a person encounters something genuinely unexpected and finds it genuinely delightful. "What's your name?" "Kai. Kai-chan." "How old are you, Kai?" 9. "What are you doing up here at 6 in the morning?" "Collecting firewood. My grandmother needs it for cooking." Bruce nodded. He looked at the key on the rock. Then back at Kai. "Not yet," he said. "I have 15 more minutes." Kai sat down on a boulder at the edge of the clearing. He set his canvas bag beside him. And he watched. For the next 15 minutes, Kai watched Bruce Lee train. Not the Bruce Lee from the movies. Not the Bruce Lee who performed for cameras and crowds and producers. The real Bruce Lee. The one who existed before the world was watching. The one who had been waking up before dawn and working alone in silence since he was a teenager in Hong Kong, since he was a young man in Seattle, since he was a nobody in Los Angeles who couldn't get a leading role and trained in his backyard because anger and discipline were the only 2 things he had in unlimited supply. Bruce pulled against the chains. Every muscle in his body engaged simultaneously. The chain creaked. The tree groaned. His feet pressed into the red clay, leaving deep impressions. His jaw locked. His eyes focused on a point in the middle distance that only he could see. His body became a single instrument of force, directed against an immovable object, over and over, generating power from stillness, teaching his nervous system to produce maximum output from zero preparation. Between sets, he breathed. Slow, controlled breaths that Kai could hear from 10 feet away. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Each exhale deliberate. Each inhale measured. The breathing of a person who understood that oxygen was fuel and fuel management was the difference between a body that lasted and a body that burned out. Kai counted 15 repetitions. On the 16th, Bruce stopped. His body released. The tension drained from his muscles like water running downhill. He stood against the tree, chest heaving, sweat running in rivulets down his torso, and breathed. Now, Bruce said, "The key." Kai jumped off the boulder, picked up the key from the rock, and brought it to Bruce. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from the proximity of something he couldn't name. The feeling of being close to a force of nature that happened to be shaped like a man. Bruce directed him to the padlock behind his back. Kai's small fingers fumbled with the mechanism. The lock clicked open. The chain fell away, clattering against the tree trunk and pooling on the red clay like a dead snake. Bruce stepped forward, rolling his shoulders, flexing his hands. He picked up a towel from a bag at the base of the tree and wiped his face. Then he pulled on a plain white t-shirt and sat down on the same rock where the key had been. "Thank you, Kai," he said. Kai stood there. He was 9 years old, and he had just unchained a man from a tree, and he didn't know what to do next. His grandmother's firewood was waiting. School started in an hour. The world of obligations and schedules and rules was pulling at him like gravity. But the man on the rock was looking at him with those sharp, dark eyes. And something in that gaze held Kai in place. Not command. Not authority. Curiosity. Bruce Lee was curious about this 9-year-old boy who had wandered into his private training ground and hadn't run away. "You're not afraid," Bruce observed. "Should I be?" Most people would be. They see a man chained to a tree. They assume something dangerous is happening. Kai considered this. "You chained yourself," he said. "The key was right there. If you wanted to get out, you could have." Bruce tilted his head. The ghost of that smile again. "How do you know I chained myself?" "Because you're not scared either." Bruce was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. Not a loud laugh. A short, surprised exhalation of genuine amusement. "You're a smart kid, Kai. My grandmother says I'm too smart. She says smart boys cause trouble. She's right." Bruce leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "But trouble is where all the interesting things happen." Kai sat down on the ground across from Bruce. He crossed his legs. The canvas bag of firewood sat forgotten beside him. The morning sun was coming through the eucalyptus trees now, casting long yellow shafts of light across the clearing. The city below them was waking up. The sound of traffic and construction and 10,000 lives beginning their day rose from the valley like a hum. "Can I ask you something?" Kai said. "You just did. Can I ask you another something?" "Go ahead. Why do you train with chains? Why not just exercise like normal people?" Bruce picked up a stick from the ground. He held it in front of him. "If I throw a punch standing in the middle of a room, my body knows how to do it. It's practiced. It's comfortable. But what if I need to throw a punch while someone is holding my arms? What if I need to generate force from a position where my body can't prepare?" He snapped the stick in half. "Clean. No effort. Most people train for ideal conditions. I train for the worst conditions. Because fights don't happen in ideal conditions. They happen in cramped spaces on uneven ground, when you're tired, when you're hurt, when everything is wrong and you have 1 second to do one thing perfectly or you lose." He set the broken stick halves on the rock beside him. "The chains teach my body to produce power when everything is restricted. When there's no room to move, no time to prepare, no opportunity to use technique the way technique is supposed to be used." He looked at Kai. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Kai thought about it honestly. Sort of. "You're saying you practice being trapped so you know what to do when you're really trapped." Bruce's expression changed. The casual warmth deepened into something more focused, more attentive. He was looking at Kai the way Kai had seen teachers look at students who had just said something unexpectedly profound. "That's exactly what I'm saying." They talked for over 2 hours. Kai didn't mean to stay that long. He meant to collect his firewood, bring the key, and leave. But Bruce Lee had a quality that Kai had never encountered in an adult before. He listened. Not the way teachers listened, waiting for you to finish so they could correct you. Not the way his grandmother listened, filtering everything through a lens of whether it was useful or dangerous. Bruce listened the way water receives a stone, completely, without resistance, letting the words land and then watching the ripples. Kai told Bruce about his grandmother, about his father on the fishing boats, about his mother, who he didn't remember except as a warmth and a scent that came to him sometimes in the space between waking and sleep, about school, which he hated because the teacher hit their knuckles with a ruler when they gave wrong answers, and Kai gave wrong answers frequently because his mind was always somewhere other than where the lesson was. Bruce listened to all of it. Then he asked a question that no adult had ever asked Kai before. "What do you want?" Kai frowned. "What do you mean? What do you want to do?" "Not what your grandmother wants. Not what your school expects. What do you want?" Nobody had ever asked him. The question was so foreign that Kai had to sit with it for a while, turning it over, examining it from different angles the way he examined interesting rocks he found on the hillside. "I want to be strong," Kai said finally. "Not big strong. Just strong enough that nobody can push me around. The boys at school. The older kids in the building. Everybody pushes me because I'm small." Bruce nodded. He didn't offer sympathy. Didn't tell Kai that size didn't matter or that bullies were cowards or any of the things adults said when they wanted to make a child feel better without actually doing anything. Instead, he stood up. He walked to the center of the clearing. And he said 2 words. "Come here." For the next 45 minutes, Bruce Lee taught Kai-Chin. Not fighting. Not martial arts in the formal sense. Principles. How to stand so that your weight was centered and someone larger couldn't push you over simply by shoving. How to breathe when you were scared so that your body stayed under your control instead of your fear's control. How to look at someone who was trying to intimidate you without looking away and without escalating. Bruce demonstrated each concept with his own body, moving slowly, precisely, narrating what he was doing and why. He positioned Kai's feet, adjusted his posture, showed him how to root his weight through his heels into the ground. "Push me," Bruce said, standing in front of Kai. Kai pushed. Bruce didn't move. Not because he was stronger, because his weight was distributed in a way that redirected Kai's force into the ground instead of into Bruce's center of mass. "Now stand the way I showed you," Bruce said, "and I'll push you." Kai planted his feet, centered his weight, breathed. Bruce pushed him. Gently at first, then with more force. Kai wobbled. His feet shifted. But he didn't fall. Again, Bruce said. They did it 7 more times. By the 7th, Kai was stable, rooted. A 9-year-old boy standing in a clearing on a hillside, holding his ground against a force that should have sent him stumbling. "That's the beginning," Bruce said. His voice carried something that Kai would only recognize years later as pride. Not pride in himself. Pride in Kai. The specific pride of a teacher watching a student understand something for the first time. Your body is small. It will always be smaller than the boys who push you. But size is not the only variable. How you use what you have matters more than how much of it you have. That is true in fighting. It is true in everything. Kai looked up at him. The morning sun was fully up now. The clearing was warm. Somewhere below them, the city was roaring with. "Were you scared?" Kai asked. "Going to America alone?" "Terrified," Bruce said. "But I learned something important on that boat to San Francisco. Fear doesn't go away. You don't conquer it. You learn to move while it's still there. The bravest people aren't fearless. They're terrified and they do the thing anyway." Another morning, Kai arrived with a bruise on his cheekbone. He tried to hide it. Bruce saw it immediately. "Who?" "Boy at school." Kai's voice was tight. "He's bigger. He takes my lunch money." Bruce set down the chain. He walked to Kai and crouched so they were eye to eye. "Did you stand the way I taught you?" "I tried. But he grabbed my shirt and—" Bruce nodded. He didn't ask for details. "What did you do after he hit you?" "Nothing. I fell down." Then he took the money and left. Bruce was quiet for a moment. "Tomorrow, when he comes, don't fight him. Don't hit him. Just stand. Stand the way I showed you. Plant your feet. Root your weight. Look at his eyes. Don't look away. Don't speak. Just stand. What if he hits me again? He might. But here's what will happen. He expects you to fall. He expects you to look away. He expects you to be afraid. If you stand and you don't fall and you don't look away, he won't know what to do. Because the thing he's actually taking from you isn't money. It's your belief in yourself. If you stand, you keep that. The money doesn't matter. The standing matters. Kai went to school the next day. The bully, a 12-year-old named Wei Han who had been taking Kai's lunch money for 3 months, approached him in the usual way, grabbed his collar, demanded money. Kai planted his feet, rooted his weight, looked at Wei Han's eyes. Wei Han shoved him. Kai shifted his weight the way Bruce had taught him. He wobbled. He did not fall. Wei Han shoved him harder. Kai absorbed the force through his legs into the ground. He wobbled again. He did not fall. Wei Han stared at him. The calculation in the bully's eyes shifted. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The small kid was supposed to fall. The small kid was supposed to cry. The small kid was supposed to hand over his money and look at the ground. The small kid was looking at him. Directly. Without blinking. Without speaking. Just standing. Wei Han let go of Kai's collar. He stepped back. He muttered something under his breath. Then he turned and walked away. He never took Kai's lunch money again. Kai told Bruce about it the next morning. He told it breathlessly, the way 9-year-old boys tell stories about their greatest victories, with every detail amplified and every emotion turned up to maximum. Bruce listened, and when Kai finished, Bruce did something unexpected. He extended his hand. Kai looked at the hand. Adult men didn't shake hands with 9-year-old boys. Not in his world. Not in any world he knew. He took the hand. Bruce shook it once. Firm. Respectful. The handshake of a man acknowledging another man, regardless of age or size. You stood, Bruce said. 2 words. Kai carried them for the rest of his life. The lessons stopped in February 1972. Bruce began filming Way of the Dragon, and his schedule became impossible. He told Kai on their last morning together. Kai tried not to cry. He failed. Bruce knelt down, eye to eye, the same position he'd taken when Kai had the bruise on his cheek. Listen to me, he said. His voice was serious, not unkind. Serious. I'm going to be very busy for a long time. I might not be able to come here every morning, but I want you to keep practicing. Every day. The breathing, the standing, the balance. Practice until it's part of you, until you don't have to think about it, until your body does it automatically. He paused. And keep collecting firewood for your grandmother. She needs you more than I do. Kai wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Will I see you again? Bruce smiled. You'll see me everywhere. I'm going to be in movies. Very big movies. You won't be able to avoid me. Despite the tears, Kai laughed. But what happened next? The thing that Kai didn't discover until months later. The thing that changed his family's trajectory more profoundly than any lesson about standing or breathing, happened in silence. Without announcement. Without ceremony. Without anyone ever knowing it had happened at all. Kai didn't learn about it from Bruce. He learned about it from his grandmother. In March 1972, 3 weeks after their last training session, Maylin sat Kai down at the kitchen table with an expression on her face that he had never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, something softer, something that looked almost like confusion. A man came to see me today, Maylin said, at the clinic, while I was paying the electricity bill. What man? A young man, Chinese, well-dressed. He said he represented someone who wished to remain anonymous. He said this person wanted to help our family. Help how? Maylin set a piece of paper on the table. It was a letter from a private school in Hong Kong. Not just any school. St. Paul's College. One of the most prestigious English-language schools in the territory. The letter confirmed that Kai-chin had been enrolled for the coming academic year. Full scholarship. Tuition, books, uniform, transportation. Everything covered. The scholarship was funded by an anonymous donor through a private trust. Kai stared at the letter. He could not read all of the English words, but he understood enough. "There's more," Maylin said. She set a second document on the table. It was a lease agreement. A new apartment. 3 rooms instead of 2. On a lower floor so Maylin wouldn't have to climb 4 flights of stairs. In a building that was not scheduled for demolition. The rent was listed as paid in full for 5 years. Maylin looked at Kai. Her eyes were wet. In 67 years, Kai had never seen his grandmother cry. Not once. "Kai," she said, "do you know anyone who would do this?" Kai thought about a man chained to a tree on a hillside. A man who listened to a 9-year-old boy talk about his dead mother and his absent father and his terrifying grandmother and his bully at school. A man who asked, "What do you want?" and actually waited for the answer. "No," Kai said. "I don't know." He kept the secret. Not because Bruce had asked him to. Because Kai understood, with the intuition of a child who had grown up reading the unspoken rules of the world around him, that this gift was not meant to be acknowledged. It was meant to be used. Quietly. Without fanfare. Without the weight of obligation that comes with knowing who gave it. Kai attended St. Paul's College. He was terrified on the first day. The other students came from wealthy families. They had uniforms that fit properly and shoes without scuffs and fathers who drove them to school. Kai had a uniform that Maylin had pressed 3 times to make the creases sharp and shoes that his grandmother had polished until they shone despite the worn soles and a bus pass that appeared in an envelope under his door on the first day of term. He was behind in English. Behind in mathematics. Behind in science. The first semester was brutal. He studied until midnight and woke at 5 and still fell asleep in class sometimes because his body couldn't sustain the schedule. But he stood. Every morning before school he practiced what Bruce had taught him. The breathing, the balance, the focus. He planted his feet. He centered his weight. He looked at the challenge in front of him without looking away. By the end of the first year he was in the top 1/3 of his class. By the end of the second year, the top 10. By the time he graduated, he had been accepted to the University of Hong Kong on a full academic scholarship that had nothing to do with any anonymous donor and everything to do with a boy who had learned, on a hillside above Kowloon, that standing your ground was the beginning of everything. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. Kai was 11. He heard the news from a classmate at school who had heard it from his mother who had heard it on the radio. Kai didn't react visibly. He sat through his remaining classes. He took the bus home. He climbed the stairs, the 3 flights of stairs in the new building instead of the 4 flights in the old one, and he walked into the apartment and set his school bag on the table. Maylin was cooking dinner. She looked at him over her shoulder. "You're quiet," she said. "Bruce Lee died," Kai said. Maylin was silent for a moment. She stirred the pot. Then she said something that Kai would think about for decades. "Many people will cry for him tonight. Famous people. Rich people. People who knew him from movies and television. But the people who will miss him most are the ones nobody knows about. The ones he helped when no one was watching." Kai looked at his grandmother. She looked back at him. And in that look, without a word being spoken, Kai understood that Maylin had always known. Had always known who the anonymous donor was. Had always known why Kai came home from the hills smelling of eucalyptus and red clay. Had always known and had never said anything because Maylin, like Bruce, understood that some things don't need to be spoken to be real. That evening, Kai went to his room. He sat on his bed. He held his hands in front of him. They were not the hands of a 9-year-old boy anymore. They were the hands of an 11-year-old student at one of the best schools in Hong Kong. A boy with a future that had been quietly, invisibly, permanently altered by a man who chained himself to a tree every morning to learn what the human body could do when everything was restricted and the only option was to push. Kai closed his eyes. He breathed the way Bruce had taught him. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Slow. Controlled. Centered. And he stood up. Not because he needed to go anywhere. Just to stand. To feel his weight in his feet. To remember what it felt like to be 9 years old and afraid and to have someone look at him and say you stood. 2 words. He carried them for the rest of his life. Kai Chin graduated from the University of Hong Kong in 1982 with a degree in civil engineering. He built bridges. Literally. He spent 30 years designing and overseeing the construction of infrastructure projects across Southeast Asia. Bridges, highways, water treatment facilities. The structural bones of cities that were growing the way Hong Kong had grown when he was a boy, fast and messy and in desperate need of someone who understood how to make things stand. He married a woman named Xu Ling who taught music at a secondary school in Wan Chai. They had 2 children, a son named James, a daughter named Lin. Kai never studied martial arts formally, never took a class, never joined a school. But every morning, for 49 years, he woke before dawn and practiced the things Bruce Lee had taught him on a hillside in Kowloon. The breathing, the balance, the standing. He did it in hotel rooms in Singapore, in construction trailers in Kuala Lumpur, on the balcony of the apartment he eventually bought for Mei Lin in a building that was never scheduled for demolition. Mei Lin died in 1989 at the age of 85. She died in the apartment that the anonymous donor had provided, in a bed that was warm, in a building that was solid. Kai was holding her hand. Her last words were practical, as all her words had been. Don't forget to turn off the stove. He turned off the stove. Then he sat beside her and breathed the way Bruce had taught him. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled, present. In 2023, at the age of 61, Kai Chin sat down with his daughter, Lin, who had become a documentary filmmaker. He told her the story, all of it, the hills, the chains, the eucalyptus trees, the 15 minutes of training he watched every morning, the 45 minutes of lessons that followed, the bully who never took his lunch money again, the scholarship, the apartment, the 50 years of standing. Lin recorded the conversation on her phone. It lasted 4 hours. When it was over, she asked her father why he had waited so long to tell anyone. Kai thought about it. He looked at his hands. The hands of an old man now. Thick-knuckled, weathered, scarred from decades of construction sites. Hands that had built bridges across rivers in countries he'd never heard of when he was 9. Because the gift was never about me, Kai said. It was about what Bruce believed was possible. He saw a boy on a hillside and decided that boy was worth investing in. Not because I was talented. Not because I was special. Because I was there. Because I needed help. Because he had help to give. He paused. If I had told the world, it would have become a story about Bruce Lee's generosity. And it was generous. Unbelievably generous. But that wasn't the point. The point was that a man chained himself to a tree every morning to understand what the human body could do under restriction. And when a boy wandered into his clearing, he didn't send him away. He taught him the same lesson. Kai looked at his daughter. The lesson was that restriction is not defeat. Limitation is not failure. Being small, being poor, being afraid, being chained, none of that determines what you can do. What determines what you can do is whether you keep pulling, whether you keep standing, whether you use what you have instead of mourning what you don't. He smiled. It was a small smile. The smile of a man who had been carrying a secret for 50 years and had finally set it down. I stood, Kai said. That's all I did. I stood. Lin published the documentary in early 2024. It was 42 minutes long. It included the audio of Kai's conversation, photographs of the hillside that was now a public park, archival footage of Bruce Lee training, and a single piece of evidence that Kai had kept in a drawer for 51 years. A key, small, iron, rusted nearly black with age. The key to the padlock that had secured Bruce Lee's training chains to the eucalyptus tree on a hillside above Kowloon in November 1971. Kai had never returned it. Bruce had never asked for it. Some keys don't open locks. They open lives. The documentary was viewed 11 million times. The comments section was not filled with debate or argument or the usual noise of the internet. It was filled with one word: repeated thousands of times by thousands of people in dozens of languages. Stood. Because in the end, that was the whole story. A man chained to a tree, a boy with a bag of firewood, and a lesson that took 2 words to teach and a lifetime to understand. You stood. That's all anyone needs to do. Stand when the world pushes. Stand when the chains tighten. Stand when the bully grabs your collar and the teacher hits your knuckles and the building is scheduled for demolition and the doctor says substantial and the morning is cold and the hill is steep and nobody in the entire world is coming to help you. Stand anyway. Bruce Lee understood that. He taught it to a boy on a hillside. And that boy built bridges. Not because he was special. Because someone saw him standing and decided he was worth a key.